Welcome to Fielding the 68, our in-house bracketology show. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm breaking news. It's almost bracket time. We are less than a week away from Selection Sunday. I can't wait. It's the most special time of the year, and we got two very special bracketologists that are here today. We've got Andy Bottoms. We've got Rocco Miller. My name is Greg Waddell. If you're watching us on the Field of 68 YouTube channel, please jump in the chat, throw some questions at us. We will answer them at the end of the show. Throw us a like, click subscribe so that you don't miss any of this content whatsoever. We've done this show all season on Mondays and Fridays. We are upping the ante for the biggest week of the season. We're going to do it 3 times this week. You're going to get a bracket from our consensus experts, pools together. We add it up, we do the numbers, and we give you a bracket every single day this week. We're going to keep you up to date on everything you need to know about who will be in and who will be out of the NCAA tournament. Gentlemen, it's great to see your faces. I would throw it to you and ask you how you're doing, but I'm just going to be honest, there's too much to get to today. So we're going to dive right in right now. It's conference tournament week, and there's always been a lot of debate. How much does performance in the conference tournament really matter for teams that are just hanging for their life on the bubble, last 4 in, first 4 out? Can a team really just totally drastically change their tournament outcome based on their performance this week? Let's go to you first, Andy.
I don't know that I'd say they can drastically change it, but it is important for those teams. I mean, the team that I follow and cover, IU, would not have been in had they not had the run of the Big Ten tournament that they did last year. So I think it's important for those teams right around the cut line. There's a couple conferences that have pretty heavy representation in those last handful of teams, the Big Ten, again, being one of them, probably the one that has the most in that range. You've got the Mountain West has some teams in there as well. And, some of the other conferences have, one team maybe where something where it means something. In general, it doesn't feel like you can move a whole bunch of seed lines in this. We've talked about that in the past. It doesn't feel like once you get to Friday, a whole lot matters, or once you get past Friday in particular. And so I don't think a team can dramatically change it, but for those teams, it is a last gasp effort. And I do think we've seen teams over the course of time. I feel like about a team a year has been rewarded for having a good run in the NCAA tournament. Maybe that's just the committee watching them and saying, hey, that you can see the desperation. These games meant something, a lot of pressure, and this team came through. And that matters. But in terms of dramatically doing something, I would say no to that part.
Rocco, what about at the top of the list here? Like, we've got a little bit of a fight going on for a final 1 seed, you could say, right? We got Purdue, we got UCLA in there. UCLA has been super hot lately. Purdue kind of up and down the stretch. Does it matter who wins longer this week between those two teams? Like, is this a situation where if Purdue loses before UCLA loses, that 1 seed is going to go to the Bruins and not the Boilermakers?
It could. It certainly could. It really depends on where the committee feels both teams are and how close they are. I personally feel like they're fairly close. UCLA, if you look at them in a vacuum, they're a program that has had a really successful year. Historically, you would just look at the resume and it would be a nice buttoned up 1 seed from in the West, traditionally speaking. But we all know UCLA didn't get the opportunities that teams like Purdue, Kansas, Alabama had. So from the Bruins standpoint, all they can do is keep taking care of their business and hope that Purdue falls at some point. Now, they did maybe even gain more ground over the weekend. They beat a really top-notch Arizona team at home. Purdue also won a home game against Illinois. UCLA's win just a tad stronger, but not enough to make the switch today. And I think, it's important for the audience to understand what actually goes on throughout this week. So I'll just reset that. The committee will fly in, I think, sometime Tuesday. First meeting will be Wednesday morning. And from there, they start their process. And they get a lot of that process done throughout Wednesday and into Thursday. Once you hit Friday, you're into your 3rd day of the process. Some of the initial seeding is done. Some of the initial, teams, at least your top 36 will probably be done, maybe top 32 at the least. And so there's going to need to be a drastic event after Thursday in order to make a change. Whether that's news, whether it's a really bad loss, that's up to your interpretation or me or Andy's interpretation. But I think that's the key for all of these decisions. So what's on the line this week are basically three different sections of the bracket. One, you've got the top line, as you mentioned, the 1 seeds. 2, you have the overall protected seeds, which are the top 16, 4 lines, 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then you've got the bubble. You got to get that right. And of course, that's where they're going to want to put most of their time in, Friday and Saturday. So just to make that very, very clear. So I think with this situation, if nothing crazy happens Wednesday or Thursday, I don't think they even play till Thursday. It's probably not going to shift much.
So later in the show, we're going to give you guys some games to watch this week that we are extremely excited about, whether they move the needle, whether it's just a game a team desperately needs. But for now, I want to know a team from each of you that you have your eye on that could really help themselves during conference tournament week. Let's go to Andy first, then we'll come back to you for the same question, Rocco.
I think for me, it's I guess I'll stay in the Big Ten. I got to stay on brand for myself, I suppose. I think it's whoever wins that Michigan-Rutgers game because they get a shot at Purdue. And at that point, a win there becomes absolutely huge. That might be, Purdue getting knocked out would be, to tie back to the prior question, maybe where UCLA is able to sneak past them because UCLA's draw due to the overall quality of the Pac-12 is a little bit easier. So I think that's a team. Rutgers is teetering right now on the one of the last spots. Michigan, one of the first handful of teams out of it, and so for them, they've got to win at least a couple. It feels like, and so I think the winner of that game gets one of the best opportunities you can get early enough in the week for things to really matter. That matchup would be on Friday when they would play Purdue. So I think it would happen early enough to really be able to make up some ground because you really got to do your work early at that part. So I'll go with whoever wins that game.
Also important to note, Andy, I will be in-house trying to drag my team, the Michigan Wolverines, through that Purdue game and into the NCAA tournament. Who knows if that will actually help them or hurt them? We'll see. It didn't help last year. Rocco, let's throw it your way. Who's a team you've got your eye on that could help themselves this week?
Greg, I've got like 11.
Pick one.
How the heck am I supposed to choose? I guess I'll just go right with a team near the cut line. I think it's Oklahoma State. My initial gut reaction when they got that win at Texas Tech over the weekend, they're still clean in terms of losses. What I mean by clean is no team above 15 losses has been selected in the NCAA tournament. So basically, if you lose 15 in the regular season, you have to assume you're going to lose a 16th in the conference tournament, then you're TKO'd. But that didn't happen to the Pokes yet. But you take a deeper look at their resume, there's still a little bit of empty calories after the road Iowa State win. I think there's still work to be done for the Pokes. And they open against a non-tournament team in their rivals, Oklahoma, which is kind of a deadly situation where not much to gain, but they got to get the win. So not only is Oklahoma State going to have to win that, I think they might have to win another game after that. So, and that, of course, will be against a top team in the Big 12. And that's the team, I think, with that's going to make the decision extremely clear for the committee with their play this week.
Yeah, they were the other one that I almost said. That'd be, even though Oklahoma's a non-tournament team, still a quad 2 opportunity for them. And then they get a crack at Texas if they win it. So, again, what you want in these cases is opportunities to play the better teams, ideally on Thursday or Friday, so that it can matter. And all the ones we mentioned get that chance if they can win.
A little bit of alignment here from Rocco and Andy early. That's a good thing on the final week of the season heading into Selection Sunday. Let's talk 1 seeds. We're going to show our consensus fielding the 68 1 seeds right now. I don't think this should surprise anyone at this point. There's been some consistency here. Alabama, Houston, Kansas, and Purdue. I think the more interesting conversation here is probably the ordering of these 1 seeds. Should Alabama be the first overall seed in this tournament? Rocco, what do you think?
Well, I think there's an argument to be made now for Houston. Alabama, of course, slipped up in the last game at Texas A&M down the stretch, and the reason for that is every piece of information that all of us have is based on a bracket preview show that happened on February 18th, I believe. And at that time, Houston was put ahead of Kansas primarily because 3 major reasons. 1, they're number 1 in all the performance metrics. 2, they're perfect away from Houston, a perfect away and neutral record. I believe that's 13-0 after the win at Memphis. And number 3 is their road win at Virginia is, if you're looking at the board alone, the overall seed list alone, is better than a win at TCU or a win at Kentucky, which is Kansas's strongest win. So now you move that needle up to Alabama. Alabama, of course, it was recognized by the chairman that they got the road win at Houston. Obviously, that's still a better road win than Houston themselves has. But now Alabama takes an extra loss. And it really just comes down to a balancing act. Do they value performance metrics and road record more than strongest road win? Or is strongest road win plus 4 other road wins against the field, which is what Alabama has, more important than what Houston's done? And I think there's an argument there. So I think those are the right top two, just based on what we understand about this committee this year. But I don't know enough to make the change. So I am sticking with Alabama at the top. But I just want to throw it out there that depending on how the committee views this, Houston theoretically could be number 1.
Okay. Andy, I want to ask you about the other side of this. We alluded to it earlier. This could be a race between Purdue and UCLA for the final number 1 seed. Is it those 5 teams? Is there anybody else you would lump in that you think is in play of getting up to the number 1 line, or is it just those 5?
I think it's just those 5. I have Texas as the 6th, and then looking at them today, just hard pressed to see a scenario. If we follow through what we just said about the conference tournaments, and that winning the Big 12 on Saturday wouldn't make a huge difference. It just feels like there's a bit too much ground to gain to make up. Now, maybe they could pass UCLA. I just don't know that they can get to Purdue at that point. So I think it's really those 5. And as you look at Purdue and UCLA, certainly things to like about either one. UCLA's got the better quality metrics, but realistically, they're 4-4 against the field. Now, they've also swept Arizona State and swept Oregon. Those are 2 teams that are in the mix. For me, Arizona State was one of the first teams left out. So, if you take those wins into account, they get 6. Purdue's got 11 wins against the field, and that doesn't include beating, Michigan and Wisconsin, who are on the wrong side of things for me. So, to me, Purdue's got more quad 1 wins, more high quad 1 wins, a little bit better non-conference strength schedule, definitely better overall strength of schedule, better road neutral record. It just, to me, as much as it feels like Purdue has trailed off a little bit and UCLA has done a ton of good things, they're one of only 4 teams in the top 16 from the committee's reveal that haven't lost since the reveal. That matters. It just is a little bit of an uphill battle, and another test of how much do some of the predictive metrics really matter, and how can they overcome a lack of volume of quality wins there. So for now, I still have Purdue there. I think they could get leapfrog potentially if they would lose that first Big Ten tournament game, but I think outside of that, would feel like they're going to end up there.
Okay, so if I'm hearing Andy correctly here, if Purdue wins that first game against the 8 or 9 seed, we think Purdue is going to hold on to the number 1 seed. Is that a fair summary? No matter what UCLA does, that's a win that game and they clinch the 4th 1 seed?
It feels that way to me a bit, just based on what we said with the committee, because at that point they would probably play Michigan State or Iowa on Saturday in the Big Ten tournament. The Pac-12 will be wrapping up at that point. There's an argument to be made that UCLA winning both the regular season and the conference championship should matter. And it's one of those where the non-bracketology part of me and just the college basketball fan would say that absolutely should matter and you should consider all the games. Unfortunately, part of doing this is trying to look at the precedent of what the committee's done, and history would tell us that those games don't mean as much as we think they do, no matter how much we enjoy the drama of watching them and talking about them and all those things.
Rocco, would you agree if Purdue wins that game, they're locked in at the 4th 1 seed?
Yeah, I mean, you can never say locked in because it always depends on how the committee views it. I agree with everything Andy said. I think in recent years and probably the last decade plus, that's just been the way it's gone. They get to that stage. I just served on a mock committee for 4 days over the weekend, and it really reminds you of what their process is like. They're pretty far beyond trying to shake that part of the bracket up unless it's something incredibly obvious, like a bad loss, a loss to a team outside of the field, things of that nature. And so chances are that's probably not going to happen. So for all intents and purposes, and the sake of this conversation, that they're probably in really good shape. But the caveat I have here is if the committee goes into this week thinking that the margin between Purdue and UCLA is a little bit more narrow than Andy and I think it is, that could be a whole different thing. Maybe they are going to wait a little bit longer to let one of those games play out through Friday. And that's where I want to leave the window open a little bit, because it's all about what's in their mind on how close they are.
That makes sense. Okay. All right. Well, any Bruin fan listeners will have to hope that either the Rutgers Scarlet Knights or the Michigan Wolverines could potentially take down Purdue. We'll see if that happens. I'll certainly be rooting for it. And if you're like me and you want to dream a world into reality where Michigan gets hot, beats Purdue, and makes a run in the NCAA tournament, well, you can believe that. You can back it up with Run Your Pool, who is hosting the official Field of 68 bracket contest this season. Our boss, Rob Doster, the lovely gentleman himself, has actually worked with Run Your Pool before, which is why he was so excited to land this sponsor. He's called me incessantly about it like 20 times in the last 2 weeks. They have more than 50 game types for every single sport you can think of. Traditional bracket pools, survivor games, head-to-head games, pickaxe games. My personal favorite is the squares. The scoring, customizable. You can tailor your bracket rules to the pool. It's honestly pretty cool. But here's the best part. Run Your Pool's giving away free money. A lot of free money. $1,500 in cash prizes. Just sign up at the link in this description. It's play.runyourpool.com/field68. That's FIELD 68. You can fill out your bracket and you're instantly eligible to win. We'll see you guys on March 12th. You all know what that date is. I alluded to it 2 weeks ago, and people were probably like, what's that date? Now we're 7 days away. Everybody knows what I mean when I say that. All right, guys, let's do some bubble talk now. We're going to go to your last four in. We'll go one by one, have both of you guys reveal your current last four in, and then we'll bring the consensus of all of our experts up at the end. Andy, let's have you go first. Who are your last four in?
All right. Well, for me, I've got Utah State there in one of the spots. The resume metrics are incredibly strong. They're ranked 21st in the net. Picked up their only quad one win of the season over the weekend by beating Boise State. And while there's a lot of holes you could poke in the resume, and that's true of any of these teams, I said this about St. Mary's earlier in the year when we were trying to figure out where to seed them. Now things have changed a little bit in that regard, but it seems unlikely to me, and maybe this is a stupid reason, that a team that ranks 21st in the net, which is the NCAA's not ranking tool, but at least sorting tool, that you are kind of crapping all over it if you leave that team out of the field. Maybe that's not the right way to think of it. And certainly if you wanted to find reasons to not put them in the field, I have no doubt that you could do that. But I have them in there. For them, if they beat the winner of New Mexico and Wyoming, then they would get Boise State again, maybe give themselves a little bit of breathing room there. Rutgers is the next one, not playing well since the Mwatmag injury. And that's when you can take the injury into account a little bit more, because you know he's not coming back. You have not a huge sample size, but they have not been good since he's hasn't been in there. Now have 3 quad 3 losses, non-conference strength of schedule that ranks outside of the top 300. But they do have 7 wins against the field. And we, certainly a lot of those came while he was still healthy. And so that game, as we talked about before, becomes huge for them against Michigan. Nevada, continuing the Mountain West flavor. This is an all Mountain West and Big Ten group for me. The resume metrics are pretty solid. Quality metrics, not so much. And so they've got a little bit of work to do as they go through it. Have 3 wins against the field as they go through there. Play San Jose State in a game they really need to win, and then they get another crack at San Diego State, who they split with over the regular season. And then Penn State makes their way in, had just took 2 buzzer beaters to get them in the field. At this point, resume metrics average out to 45, quality metrics about 50th. They're 5 and 6 in the top in quad 1, which helps them a bit. 6 and 8 road neutral. Picking up that win at Northwestern last week was huge. They've also won at Illinois. So if we believe what we took away from the committee reveal earlier, you feel good about having a couple really top end road wins there for them. And they face the Illini again. And then they get another crack at Northwestern, who they just played, if they're able to win. So those are the 4 for me.
Andy, let me dig in a little further to Rutgers. We keep coming back to how pivotal the potential 8-9 spot is in the Big Ten here. For Rutgers, is it win 1 and in, whereas Michigan needs to win that game and then beat Purdue? Does Rutgers feel good if they just beat Michigan and get to Purdue?
I tend to think yes, although the challenge with being in this part of the bracket is you're very dependent upon what others do around you, and you're very dependent upon any potential bid thieves. So from CUSA is really the biggest one. You still be watching some other conferences to see what's there. So I tend to feel like they could exhale a little bit. But I think Dayton could still be a very likely destination for them. Of you accomplish some things, you've got an injury, we're going to put you in, but you got to prove it and go to Dayton. Feels like a fairly likely scenario for them.
Got it. All right, Rocco, we'll go to you next. Let's see your last four in. Who you got?
All right. Well, it's going to be impossible to explain this to you, gentlemen, without just giving you an overview real quick. So to the audience, if you look at a field of 68, there's no bid steals yet, right? So you've got 22 automatic bids coming from teams that are outside of our projected cut line. All right. So that leaves a top 40 that I'm pretty sure about. All right. So you add the 22 plus the 40, we're at 62. Everybody with me? That leaves 6 open spots for me. So you could call it last four in, whatever you want. But for me, I think all 6 of those spots are open. And I think there's up to 10 teams available for those 6 spots. Now, I'll just quickly say, above all of those, I went with Wisconsin and Nevada, just because in these situations, it always serves me best historically to just go back to what every committee member has ever said consistently throughout the years, which is, who did you play? Where did you play them? How did you do? And so the first decision there, if you're going to put Wisconsin in the field, I think they've got to be above everybody else, just based on the fact that they've won at Marquette, they've won at Iowa, and now their Penn State road win and overall sweep of Penn State looks better and better than it ever did before. So Wisconsin's that first choice for me. The second choice, I did end up going with Nevada, just based on the fact that I think when you do a breakdown of them versus Utah State, there's a little bit more to like. Nevada's got the San Diego State home win that Utah State did not get. Both of those teams, you really want more on the road, but Nevada did get a little bit more done, neutral games, etc., and better record in some of the breakdowns, and they don't have as ugly of losses, even though Nevada lost at home to UNLV on Saturday, which clearly makes them not safe. So any team I'm about to mention are not safe. Please make that clear. Next, we get to our last four in. We start with Penn State. Penn State's a team that made a move over the weekend, a great win at the end there, just nipped it out against Maryland, picked up a road win at Northwestern, dramatically improved their profile. When you look at Penn State across the board, they've played 13 games against teams that will likely be in the tournament. They're 6-7. That's a lot better than what it was just a week ago when they were 4-7. You take away all their quad 4 games, and now they're 13-12. It's a little bit more digestible than being under 500. And then they've got the road resume with the sweep of Illinois, the Northwestern win, and even though Ohio State is completely falling apart, they got that road win a while back, and it matters for whatever it's worth. Their other metrics are meeting up, and they don't have a bad loss. So Penn State's there. The next 2 teams I'm going to mention are in very, very similar situations. In fact, so similar that it's impossible in a lot of ways to separate them. And that's the Providence Friars and the NC State Wolfpack. There are reasons to put them in. If you just want to go off metrics and go off their great home wins, then sure, Providence and NC State will find a way in. Historically, especially if you look at 2019's version of TCU, this is a team that the committee could easily look at and leave out of the field. And I'm talking about both the Friars and the Wolfpack. And because the fact that Providence's trio of UConn, Marquette, Creighton, and their overall win percentage of 30%, they went 3-7 against 10 tournament teams, to NC State's 2-5, which is 28%. I barely have Providence above NC State, but there's a lot to pick at in both of these resumes because they did not get it done on the road. Both of them play in power conferences. Providence also has 3 road wins against Q2 that are non-tournament teams: Seton Hall, Villanova, Butler. NC State has 2: Virginia Tech, Wake Forest. They're both, NC State's a little bit better overall away neutral. Providence is 6-8. So again, this is going to be hotly talked about throughout the week with the actual committee. For now, we leave them both in. They're both going to Dayton. The 4th team, Arizona State, hangs on because of that primary question I said at the very beginning of all this. Who did you play? Where did you play? How'd you do? They've got the road win at Arizona, which is a much more expensive piece of gold than any of these teams have. And the neutral Creighton win, even though no Kalkbrenner, still matters a little bit. And overall, they're 14-10 when you remove quad 4, even though they have a quad 4 loss, which complicates things. But I think the true reason for Arizona State is 4 road wins against the top 2 quads at tough places to win: Arizona, Colorado, Oregon, and Stanford. It's 1 more than Providence. It's 2 more than NC State. It's more than some of the teams I left out. Arizona State hangs on by a thread.
Which one of those, NC State and Providence in the middle, you lump them together, which one of them do you think has the greater opportunity to swing where they're at this week in the conference tournament? Obviously, they both have an opportunity, but is there one that's more obvious?
Yes. Clearly Providence. They're playing UConn first game, so it's like you win that, you alleviate a lot of those concerns. I think in general, like I said, Providence is in a better position. They've got 1 additional win against the field. All 3 of their home wins are awesome. They also have weaker metrics from weaker road win, but I think some of that stuff's more important. And the fact that they have Seton Hall, Nova, Butler versus NC State's VTech, Wake is 1 extra road win as well. I think NC State's in a really tough spot.
Okay. Interesting. All right. Let's see our consensus. Last 4 in now. Again, Andy and Rocco do great work. We've also got Brad Waddell, Lucas Harkins that contribute here every single day. We are updating the bracket, and our consensus last 4 in is Nevada, Penn State, Rutgers, and Utah State. Let's move to first 4 out. Teams that are clinging to hope and right now find themselves on the wrong side of the cut line. Rocco, we'll have you go first here. Who are your first 4 out?
Yeah, we'll start with Oklahoma State. I mentioned them earlier. In my initial post-Saturday feelings and going through committee meetings and stuff like that, I thought they were going to get in. I thought they had done enough, but you do another breakdown. And when you take away quad 4, they're just 12-14. And it's just, Wisconsin's an inch closer than that. They're 1 under. They're 12-13. But you look at the wins, and Oklahoma State's don't match up to Wisconsin's. They've got the really nice sweep of Iowa State, which Iowa State's performance this weekend that helped them. But just home wins against TCU and West Virginia, an overall 4-11 record in 15 games against teams that are going to the tournament. That's a pretty tough win percentage for the Cowboys. And their draw this week is Oklahoma and Texas. They almost kind of need both, really, especially if the committee agrees with my assessment. And so then next I have Utah State. Everything Andy said, I 100% agree with, which is so crazy to say because he has them in and I don't. But that's just how narrow these margins are at this moment. And I agree. It is the NCAA's tool. I think, just a couple of weeks ago, we had reasons to leave West Virginia out around the same ranking. They were, I think, 24th, and I had them out at that time. I think at some point, if it doesn't happen this year, it'll happen one year where the net gets gamed a little too much and somebody in the 20s gets left out. I just think that whole old question of who'd you play, where'd you play, how'd you do, they're not checking those boxes. Their best road win is at number 89 UNLV. Their next best road win is at 100-something Colorado State. If you want to throw San Francisco in there because they played them at the Chase Center, that's still a team that's in the hundreds, even after their great win over Santa Clara. So I don't have enough reasons, and the bad losses are home to Weber State, neutral to SMU. I don't have enough reason to put them in still. It's just I'm having a struggle with them big time. The next team is Rutgers, which might stun a lot of people. It's not here for shock value. I went with what a committee actually cares about, the team you're bringing to the dance. Since Maywat Meg's injury, they're 2-6. They have not looked themselves in almost all of those 8 games, even the ones they've won. And the resume itself, much like Oklahoma State, you remove quad 4. They've played 7 quad 4 games, Greg. Mm-hmm. All you got left, 11-13 record. So I don't care about the Meg injury as much as that. And you look at the non-conference straight to schedule. If you think Providence is extreme at 292, or if you think NC State's extreme at 245, why don't you try Rutgers at 309 for size? That's tough. And they're 4-8 away neutral. And their strength of resume is not 62. The committee has all the reasons in the world, besides the great win at Purdue, to leave them out. And that's just where I landed. And the last one, I won't waste any more time, is still Charleston. They're still hanging around for all the same reasons. Not much has changed for them, but they have a huge semifinal game tonight.
I love the passion, Rocco. I got to be honest. Again, I'm a Big Ten guy. I think anybody watching this probably knows this at this point. But I've been watching Rutgers all season long. Obviously, they've played some great games. The Purdue game single-handedly saving their season right now. But this team for a while now, obviously you lose Mag, it's a totally different team, but they have just not been a good basketball team. So I like the passion. I like hearing what is the committee looking at with this group, Rocco. Sometimes I question it myself. I want to ask you quickly about Charleston, then we'll go to Andy. So last 4 out for them right now.
Yep.
They've got to win their conference tournament. You would expect that hopefully they will. I think on paper they should. But is it just a no way, not happening? They're out if they don't?
Not at all. No, the reason I'm leaving them in the last 4 out is because there's a chance they get in without winning it. If they were going to win it, then it would be a waste of time. I think, Hofstra's the #1 seed. Hofstra's humming right now. I think that game's a toss-up if it happens. So if they lose a close one to Hofstra, you really got to go deep with Charleston. At that point, they'd have 29 D1 wins. Be unprecedented, I think, to leave them out at that many wins. Same goes for Oral Roberts if they get to their championship, but I think all of us have them penciled in as the champion right now. So we might have to talk about them later in the week. But I think you really got to dig deep on Charleston if they lose to Hofstra in the final, even if they lose to UNC Wilmington in the championship or Towson tonight, they're still probably going to get discussed. So, their resume metric is 45. There's not a lot of common denominators between them and big schools at all. And then it's just up to, the committee has 12 people, Greg. 6 of them are from mid-major and load-major conferences. 6 of them are from power conferences. Who's the alpha in the room? How does the discussion go? What do they value? What do they care about? I would give Charleston more of a chance than a 15-loss Oklahoma State in that scenario.
Interesting. All right. So just because you see your team's name next to the graphic that has the word out in it, don't panic yet, Charleston. There's more basketball to be played. We don't know. Let's go to Andy next. Andy, who are your first 4 out?
Yeah, a lot of teams we've already discussed, so won't belabor that too much. But Oklahoma State was first team out for me. Again, it's a little bit of the precedent of how far over 500 are they. They're 1-10 in high quad 1 games. And so the Big 12 affords you a lot of opportunities. They've taken advantage of a handful of those. The sweep of Iowa State is obviously huge for them. But they've got, beat Oklahoma. Then if you lose to Texas, you end up 18-15. Is that enough? I feel like it gets pretty dicey at that point. The resume metrics are, average about 47.5. Quality metrics are a little bit better than that for them. So we'll be interested to see what happens there. But 4-11 against the field, as I have it right now. So that becomes a little bit tough. Wisconsin, Rocco talked about them. I don't know if I've talked about this for weeks where it's like you feel like every time you do this, you're going to have them out. I don't know if I was just so disgusted that they needed to, eke one out at the end against Minnesota that I finally pulled the trigger. I don't know. I'd like to think I was more objective than that, but I could be wrong. As we look at that, so they got Ohio State and then Iowa if they win that game. They've got the Tyler Wall injury from earlier in the season to take into account or figure out how the committee will take into account. Only 1 loss outside of the top 2 quadrants that came to Wake at home as part of the ACC Big Ten Challenge. But have beaten 7 wins against the field, 6 quad 1 wins. And winning at Marquette, at Iowa, and that sweep of Penn State. And I think the obvious comparison is between them and Penn State. Penn State's metrics are better on the resume side. They're better on the quality side. Wisconsin has beaten them twice. So it's fair to look at that part of it. But Wisconsin and I go back to a little bit of what you said, Greg, about Rutgers. As somebody who watches a lot of Big Ten basketball, which, I mean, why we do that to ourselves is probably a separate therapy session that we can have later. But they're just not playing well. And I know we can talk about the eye test and things like that, but they're a rough watch more often than not. And they've done enough to warrant a chance to get in. So I'm not saying that they're definitely out. And if somebody had them in, I really wouldn't argue with it. There's certainly reasons to do that. So we'll see what they do. Charleston, I had them in the mix as well. If they win, get to 29, and they'd end up 29-4 against D1 opponents if they win over Towson and then lose in the final. It's hard to turn a blind eye to that team. The challenge becomes that nothing really stands out from a metric standpoint. Non-conference strength of schedule isn't particularly good, even though I think they probably thought some of the games they got would be better than they turned out to be. a pair of quad 3 losses, and 17 of their wins in quad 4. But 12-2 road neutral at this point, beat Virginia Tech, beat a good Kent State team. We're close against Carolina, and losing to Hofstra the other time, not a huge deal. They did lose at Drexel. That's kind of the worst loss that's on their profile. So that'll be an interesting one. I think it'll be a compelling case, and one that will get talked about a lot as you look at a mid-major team who really thrived versus some of these other teams who got every opportunity in the world and made good on a third of them. And did they deserve to get in over them? And then I got Arizona State after that. I think Rocco made some compelling points about them. For them, they get Oregon State in their first Pac-12 tournament game, and then they get USC again if they win, who they just lost to over the weekend. But 10-6 in road and neutral games. Just those couple wins against the field at Arizona in the Creighton game. Did win at Oregon, beat Michigan, which helps for bubble purposes. Beat VCU team that's played really well of late. So there's some good things on their resume. The predictives do not like them. They average out to 65, and even the resume metrics average out to be outside of the top 50. So an interesting team there. I think if you want to look at the good wins, and I never really know how the committee views things like the buzzer beater against Arizona. That's by far their best win. If you're going to put them in the field, that win matters a ton. Is it discounted in some way because it's a little bit of a fluky play? Probably shouldn't be. There's lots of fluky plays that happen all the time, and I think you get into that level of granularity, you probably tie yourself in knots pretty quickly. But something I've always wondered about, how a win like that, as improbable as it was, and something like that, is it looked at any differently as that game was a toss-up? They could have just as easily lost, and if they lost that game, we're not talking about them at all.
Yeah, it's fascinating to think about how slim the margins between in and out are right now. And, maybe if they do shrug that off with Arizona State of like, hey, they could have easily lost this, let's discount it. I hope they do the same with wins, because Michigan has about 14 losses this year that, they could have easily won. Let's just sneak them in the tournament. Who cares, guys? Who cares? Let's see our consensus first 4 out now as a group. Obviously, you saw these two's lists, and there was some dissension, particularly with Wisconsin. Wisconsin is the first team in our consensus first 4 out, followed by Arizona State, Oklahoma State, and then Charleston. Good job, guys. I mean, you guys nailed a lot of this. Very good job. I'm excited about this. I feel like I'm seeing the actual show. It's only 6 days away now, but I'm getting the jitters just thinking about it. And this is the best place to get all the information you need before Selection Sunday. So shout out to our listeners. Throw some questions in the chat. We're 1 segment away from answering your questions to end the show. First, we're going to do some quick hitters on a few particular teams, though. I want to start. Where do you think I want to start, boys? With the Michigan Wolverines. Horrible week. The no good, very bad week with 2 overtime losses, games that Michigan had leads late in the second half, and both of those to put away didn't happen. Are the Wolverines completely done, Andy?
I don't think they're completely done. As we talked about earlier, I think if they can beat Rutgers and then beat Purdue, makes their case far more compelling. Challenge right now, the quality metrics far outpace the resume metrics, and time has shown that the resume metrics are more important for selection, as would kind of make sense. They're 3-11 in Q1 games. The Q4 loss to Central Michigan doesn't help. 5-10 in road neutral games, and so they're 7-10 against the field as I had it. Now that doesn't include, they split with Wisconsin, but they also lost to Carolina and Arizona State. So while head-to-head doesn't mean anything, and clearly not, because I had Penn State in and Wisconsin out, it probably doesn't help to have a couple of the teams that you're right next to on the outside of the field as teams that you lost to over the course of the season. Yeah,
especially if you look at the group of first 4 out, and Michigan's lost to like all 3 of them. That's what it feels like.
Yeah, they're 1-3 in their games against those. Some of those. I guess I guess Carolina's not in that mix quite yet. They're probably the next tier out. But yeah, that doesn't help matters. I think that's why it becomes important that it's not just the Rutgers game for them. I think they need to win at least a couple.
Yeah, that makes sense. All right, let's move to the SEC. Kentucky, the Wildcats. This team has just been steadily climbing over the last few weeks. It went from mid-season on our After Dark show, we were questioning if Calipari deserved that job anymore, to now, can Kentucky go to a Final Four? Who knows? From a bracket standpoint, how far can the Wildcats keep climbing up the seed list, Rocco?
Yeah, I mean, I think getting up to the 5 line is certainly possible. Right now I have them very comfortably in the 6 line area, which is where they were a week and a half ago when they had their big ascent. Then they took the home Vanderbilt loss. Now, of course, they go out and win at Bud Walton Arena, a very difficult place to get a win, to add on top of their road Tennessee win and a lot of good wins they've had in recent 6 to 7 weeks. So they could get up to a 5. I think some of those things are starting to really materialize. Some of the teams that they were looking at passing, like Iowa State and maybe Miami and others, they actually had pretty good wins over the weekend. So those teams can continue to win. Kentucky might be stuck on the 6 line. And to say they're going to get all the way up to a 4, knowing how the committee process works, that's a little too much to predict. So 6 for now with the opportunity to get to a 5.
I think Kentucky fans would probably feel pretty good if they ended up on the 5 line. I don't like to put my my head inside Kentucky fans' heads very often, but if I'm them after where they were a couple months ago, I'm okay with that. As long as you don't lose in the first round, I like that odd. All right, let's go to North Carolina next. I want to ask both you guys on the Tar Heels because we've spent so much time picking at this team all season long. I think kind of assuming they would just find a way to get in the dance. I don't know that I necessarily am speaking for everybody here. Maybe someone had them out at some point, but the last week didn't go how a lot of people thought it would for the Tar Heels. Do they have any hope at this point, Andy, to make the dance if they don't win the ACC tournament?
It feels like a stretch at this point. I mean, there just isn't very much when you look at what they've actually accomplished that makes you feel like there's enough there. And for them, you look at where they sit right now. Resume metrics are 49. Quality metrics are better than that. They're 1-9 Q1. I've got them at 2-10 against the field. Now, that if you want to include Charleston, who's in my first 4 out, and Michigan, who's lurking just past that, that makes them 4-10. If you want to make yourself feel better, that becomes a really tough one for me. And they really are at a point where when one of the best things you have going for you is I don't have a Q3 or a Q4 loss, that's probably not ideal because it suggests you just don't have enough else there. Home wins over Virginia and NC State are their only 2 against tournament teams. Best true road win is at Syracuse, even though they are 7-9 in road neutral games overall. Just doesn't feel like enough. So, and then you spin it forward to what can they really accomplish in the ACC tournament in their early games. They're going to play Boston College or Louisville. That doesn't move the needle at all in that game, in their first game. Then they would play Virginia, who that would give them another Q1 win if they could win that one. So that becomes important. But just at that point, you've gone from 2 wins against the field to 3. That just doesn't feel like enough. And then you're probably facing Clemson or NC State after that. NC State, they were able to split with over the course of the season. But Clemson is one who's on the outside looking in as well. So the draw for them in terms of providing a ton of great opportunities to really prove themselves tournament worthy isn't quite there outside of that Virginia game. They might be able to, push Clemson further outside of the field or NC State, further toward the bubble, but just not it wouldn't be a marquee win. And your best chance to, for them, it would have been being able to play Duke or Miami earlier and being able to get some of those wins. And it's just not how the draw shook out for them. So it definitely feels like it's win the ACC or that's it.
Rocco, how far out is UNC for you right now on the seed list?
I've got a pencil in at 5, but honestly, New Mexico down at 7th out for me. I could see the committee having more reasons to put them in than Carolina, just because they have the win at San Diego State and at St. Mary's. Those are 2 tremendous road wins. I'll say it 1,000 times probably today, but the committee cares about where you won and how you did and who you played, and that equates to big time road wins. And New Mexico is the only team really in that outside group that's got them. So even though they've got way worse losses than Carolina, I think Carolina is in a tough spot because, like Andy nailed it, the bracket they have, the best team they can win against, by the end of Friday is Virginia, which is a nice win, but they've already beat them. And it's not, it's a neutral court win. It's not a road win though. And they're playing in their backyard in Greensboro. So, I think for Carolina, they're in this weird spot just from a basketball standpoint where I could easily see them just getting knocked off by Boston College and everybody agrees they're in the NIT. There's no more debate. We're done. And I could also see them just getting out of that Boston College game if that's who they play and going on a run because they're in Greensboro. So yeah, I mean, I feel like the book's not shut because of that, but I think if they go on a run, they might just win the whole thing.
Yeah, it's hard to shake that after what happened last year, isn't it? Like
You just can't count them out.
I keep telling myself they're performance art, right? They're showmen. Caleb Love, RJ Davis, they like the big moment. They just want to make it even bleaker than it was last year before they turn it around. The problem is they might have gone one step too far by losing against Duke in the final game of the regular season. Yeah, you got to keep your eye on the Tar Heels until we finally get word from the committee that they're not in the field. Then maybe we can go back to debating whether or not last year's run was a fluke. We'll get there one step at a time. Let's bring Dagan in now. Dagan, do we got any questions from the chat?
Yes, we do, Greg. We have a few here, so we'll try to run through them fairly quickly. Here's a good one from Kevin. He wants to know, does the committee care or look at wins over automatic qualifiers? So obviously we talk about wins against the field. So how does that impact? For instance, here Furman, isn't it? Is it one for Penn State?
Yeah, that is looked at. It is highlighted on their team sheet as soon as it becomes an automatic bid. So if Furman wins tonight, that would be highlighted by tomorrow. And they have a way fancier software than Andy or I have, where stuff updates in real time. But yeah, they know who they beat. I don't know how often it really comes up. I've talked to people about this over the years. Andy, you should chime in too. But it's just kind of like a footnote when you're presenting a team's overall story, right? You talk about the good, you talk about the bad, and oh, by the way, they had Oral Roberts, Furman, and Toledo. So they beat 3 other teams that are going to be in this thing. It's not looked at and categorized the way that we talk about wins against the field in the same manner. So the answer is yes, but it's also with an asterisk.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think some of the ones against the higher end mid majors. So Rocco just threw out a few of them, right? Like I think the Oral Roberts win means more this year than it did in most. As a team that's been really good, one of the only teams with 4 losses in the country and have been there kind of start to finish. I think Furman probably falls in that category as well. Versus IU beating Kennesaw State earlier in the year doesn't make a huge amount of difference for them. It you can look at it that way, but it to me, I think the ones that are in the 12 and 13 range might help you a little bit if not really as a tiebreaker, but it at least shows some another good team that you played. But odds are most of those wins came at home, so it maybe means a little bit less. Although I think the Penn State win over Furman was a neutral court win, if I'm thinking of it correctly.
Yeah, Charleston Classic. Yeah.
All right. Next one. Your thoughts on Xavier versus UConn? Kind of how that plays out between those two teams.
I mean, I have UConn above them at this point. I had UConn actually as my last 3 seed, maybe a little bit too high. But to me, I think you got to start to look at Tennessee just a little bit differently without Zakai Ziegler, because again, another injury, he's not going to be back. I think there was things that you could nitpick about Tennessee even prior to that. And so I had UConn just over them. They were one of the teams I mentioned where there was 4 teams that haven't lost since the reveal. Now they were a 5th because they were mentioned as what would have been a 5 seed. And while none of the wins, they beat Providence at home, they won at Villanova, haven't been, huge. It's really kind of allowed them to build a little momentum back to where they were at the beginning of the season. Their Big East schedule was pretty front loaded, and so it took a little bit of the shine off of what they'd done in the non-conference by struggling a little bit early in that. So I have them over Xavier. I think, again, we want to talk injuries. You got the Zach Fremantle injury, and now the fact that he's done for the year for Xavier, where that wasn't the case there. And Xavier's 4-1 since the reveal as well, but very similarly, they haven't had as many of their tough games. They won at Providence, they won at Seton Hall, so a couple nice road wins, lost at home to Villanova. But I do think as you look at what they are and will be, they haven't been as impressive without Fremantle in there. So I've had UConn above them for probably a little bit now, and had UConn on the 3 line today.
Cool. Can Duke how high can Duke get if they win the ACC tournament?
Yeah, I would say 5's a stretch. They would need a lot of teams to fall. I think they're actually that might not be necessarily the case. I think the committee could have them as a 6 right now. I have them as my highest 7. They're right in there with I think Kentucky's road work is so much better than Duke's that I think Kentucky should clearly be above Duke, but Northwestern could be debated, I guess, just based on the fact that Northwestern's had mixed results. Obviously, some great road wins, but Duke's been really clean and perfect at home and all that good stuff, but they just haven't done a lot on the road. And this is, again, like Carolina, a tournament in their backyard. They've got a nice draw early. I guess they play Pittsburgh maybe first, so a chance to get a couple good wins early and get maybe safely into the six zone. But to pass 4 more teams, at least from where I have them sitting, is probably too much to ask. They would need some of those other teams to not only lose, but lose to a non-tournament team.
Yeah, I had them in a similar spot. They were my top 7. It just feels like a lot for them to jump. I think they could very easily get onto the 6 line, but a 5 feels unlikely to me just based on the quality of the wins. The Pitt win helps. Then they probably play Miami at that point, so they at least have a draw that gives a little bit of opportunity for that, even though Pitt's kind of in that 10-ish seed range probably at this point. But I would agree 6 feels like as high as they could get, unless the committee really values what they've done more than apparently we do.
I was going to chime in quickly on how impressive I think Duke has been lately, just given their string of 6 straight wins, even going back, it's now 9 of 11. But you start to dive into who those wins are against. They haven't beaten a team that is firmly in the field since the middle of January, guys. So I think you guys are accurate in where you're putting this. In my head, just as a fan, without diving into that, it's like, oh, Duke's as hot as Kentucky is right now. Maybe still a ledge behind them, given who these games have come against. Let's do 2 more, Dagan. What else we got?
Perfect. I had 2 more picked out, so this works out great. Tony wants to know, how do you guys deal with like recency bias? For instance, Iowa losing to Nebraska or Iowa State ending a skid when you guys are making your bracket.
Yeah, I mean, the committee will tell you it's about the body of work. So a result on opening night's the same as a result last night. I will say this: there's a human element to the entire committee, structure. It's 12 human beings, regardless of their title. Most of them are athletic directors, and they're getting in a room. And the selection committee has been such an honor for anybody that gets nominated and selected as a part of it. They watch games a lot. I mean, I've talked to a lot of the people that have served or are currently serving, and they take tremendous pride in it. They end up becoming junkies in at least January, February, March, when they have to ramp up for these meetings. Maybe they don't watch all the holiday tournaments like we do, but they get a good sense of what's going on. So I think just some of the human nature of that. You watch Texas A&M the last 2 months, you're like, God damn, they're a good team. Like, how are we going to keep them a 7 seed, for example? So, and then you have some people like, Andy Bobbins is an IU guy. The chairman's an IU former player. A couple of the people in the room like him have basketball brains. So we've heard that in the past be a decision, like, who do we think is just better? Because we can't decide. So let's just go who we think would win on a neutral court. So some of that stuff does matter because those conversations will be based on what just happened in the last couple of weeks or the last time you saw them, or, who's Tennessee without Ziegler, or who's Rutgers without, Maywat Mag, right? So all of that has to kind of still stick in your brain if you're in a seat like Andy or I's, because we don't know exactly where the conversation is going to go. But in terms of criteria, it is not criteria. So I just want to make that perfectly clear. I just think there's some element where, whatever percent you want to put on it, it has some level of meaning.
Yeah, they used to, and I forget, it's been enough years now that it hasn't been there for a while, but they used to have a record in the last 10 or 12 games on the team sheets that they would look at. And so it obviously mattered then. You're not putting stuff on there that you're not going to, give a little bit of weight to. And so they got away from that, which there's probably pros and cons to it. For us, it becomes that exercise of you have to take the committee at their word and say that, game 1 and game 30 mean the same thing. You're looking at the whole body of work. But I do think that's one of the harder parts of doing this, because if you're watching the games and not just looking at the numbers, and you got to do a combination of both those things, it's hard not to get caught up in that. I mean, what Greg said about Duke is a great example of that, right? You look at how they're playing lately. They're probably playing above what a 7 seed would be, but you look back and based on some missed opportunities earlier in the year and the fact that the ACC isn't as strong as it has been previously, it's just hard to justify looking at some of that. And so that's where some of the metrics that look at things over the course of the year, whether they be predictive or resume based, can be informative in there, because those things are not giving weight to one game over another. And trying to look at it that way, but it's definitely a difficult part of it. And there's certainly things we talked about this when the committee did the reveal, that it sure felt like there was some recency bias in some of those selections. Now you don't know that, you're just trying to connect the dots. And so probably some things that you may see on Selection Sunday that may suggest there's more recency bias even in the NCAA process than what they would say there is.
All right, final one. This one is going to require a little bit of thinking maybe. Which conference tournament is going to, or has the biggest implications for bracketology this week?
Conference USA, for sure, because it's a league where Florida Atlantic's pretty much a lock at this point. If they would have lost their last game at La Tech and then lost to the winner of Western Kentucky or UTEP, they would have maybe slipped far enough with those two bad losses to be back in this bubble mix. But now the Owls, I mean, come on, 25-3, awesome team. They lost a couple games on the road in league play, perfect at home. Didn't have the strongest schedule, but they've done enough. I think we'd all agree they're in. And that leaves 10 other teams in that bracket. If any of them win, that's a second bid that we're not accounting for. So that's the easiest answer possible. Some other ones to pay attention to would be the American Conference, where right now Houston and Memphis are the only teams in. That means if any of the other teams in that bracket win it somehow, obviously Houston and Memphis are beasts. That's another big gone. You got to look at a league maybe like the Pac-12, where Oregon has a bye all the way to the same round as UCLA and Arizona. So if the Ducks get hot, they could steal a bid. Even Washington State, who plays Cal before they would play Oregon, you would imagine they could blow Cal out and save their energy. And Washington State's a team that comes in with 6 straight wins into the Pac-12 tournament. That's another league to pay attention to. I think the ACC itself, Clemson's in the same exact situation as Oregon. I'm not as high as like a Joe Lunardi on Clemson, but they've done a lot this year, and they're capable of winning 3 games in a row. They're the 3 seed in the tournament. They could do it. Right now, we agree North Carolina's not in. They could do it. So that's a tournament to pay attention to. I think those are the top 4 that come to my mind. I don't know if Andy wants to add more.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you look at Rocco answered that very well from a bid thief perspective, which is going to be of supreme importance to a lot of the bubble teams this week. If you just look at sheer volume of bubble teams, you probably look in the Big Ten. I mean, we talked about a lot of Big Ten teams. I think 4 of them over the course of the show, in Michigan, Rutgers, Wisconsin, and Penn State, all of whom have key games and key opportunities once you get past their the initial Wisconsin-Ohio State game. Everybody has a chance to earn a win that might put them in and might flip somebody out. We had 3 teams within our last consensus, last 4 in, first 4 out. So 3 of the 8 are Big Ten teams, and Michigan was just outside of the first 4 out. So I think that one, from a bubble perspective, has the most implications because there's the most uncertainty around that. And I think the ACC a little bit in that mix when you got NC State and North Carolina in there as well. But I think the Big Ten, really, from a bubble perspective, is going to have a lot to say about the last few teams that are in the field.
Yeah, that's my answer, by the way. It's this one. There's a lot of teams that could be in or out in that conference. Dagan, thank you for the questions. Chat Mob, thank you for the questions. We appreciate you rocking with us and watching the show. Again, we're doing this 3 times this week, so you'll have more opportunities to ask these guys questions. Just show up again
actually, Greg, we're doing it 4 times this week.
We're doing it 4 times, counting the Selection Sunday show.
We're doing it
You're
4
right,
times
Dagan.
this week.
You're absolutely right. So you have more opportunities, Chat Mob, to come back in and ask these handsome gentlemen what they think of your team. Let's do a couple games to watch. Like I said, we've got more shows than usual, so our pool of games to watch will be a little smaller, given that we're not going to get into Thursday's games because we will have another show by then. So give us your games to watch up until Thursday. Andy, we'll start with you.
Well, we talked about Charleston. They play Towson tonight, would play in the CAA final on Tuesday. A big couple days for them. Then in the Summit League, you've got Oral Roberts playing. They're not in the final yet, but if they get there and lose, that becomes another team that gets thrown into the at-large mix that would be interesting. And other Big 12 on Wednesday, you got West Virginia, Texas Tech, Oklahoma State, and Oklahoma. I think West Virginia has rocketed all the way up to a single-digit seed for me, so I think they're safe even with a loss. But Oklahoma State, Oklahoma, we talked about a couple times during the show. So those kind of one thing from each day that stood out to me.
Yeah, and I'll just throw a few from I'm going straight to Wednesday just because I think a lot of the bubble's going to take the court the next time on Wednesday. So starting with Wisconsin, I might have had them apparently well inside. I tried to make it very clear that there's 6 spots that are completely open. Wisconsin holding one of those. They're a team that when you remove the quad 4, 12 and 13, thanks to that Minnesota win, they'll play Ohio State. I think if they lose that Ohio State game, it'll be a lot easier to take them out of the field entirely. So they got to at least win that game to stay in their current position, from my perspective. I would also say Arizona State, who I think they're my last team out and Andy's first team. Sorry, they're my last team in and Andy's first team out. They open up with the Beavers of Oregon State, who I think the entire country will overlook. And that means the Arizona State Sun Devils themselves need to not overlook them and listen to everybody else, because Oregon State's gotten a little bit better. They're not as bad as last year. Jordan Pope's been an amazing freshman point guard coming on strong in the month of February. They knocked off USC, if you remember, a couple weeks ago. So I don't think you can overlook the Beavers here in Vegas, where I'm currently at on Wednesday. So because Arizona State's draw, they play USC next. And I think that's just human nature to really try to correct what you got wrong against USC just last Saturday. Try to look ahead a little bit. The Beavers will give them a fight, I think. And then I think lastly, you've got to look at NC State. There's a good chance they'll play Virginia Tech. And, no matter who they play, they'll play the winner of Virginia Tech and Notre Dame. So that brings up 2 different challenges. Virginia Tech's a team that gave them trouble earlier in the year. They have nothing to lose. They won the tournament last year. Obviously a different team now, but they play that 5-out Mike Young style, three ball. It's a good system to win a tournament, as they proved last year. They have nothing to lose. NC State's going to have a lot of pressure on them, I believe. What happens there, we'll see. If Virginia Tech gets upset by Notre Dame, we all know what that storyline's going to be. It's going to be like, oh, Mike Bray's not done yet. Let's keep the party going. Jameson shots after every win. That's a tough spot for NC State too, if it's Notre Dame. So again, that's going to be something to watch on Wednesday.
There is a lot to keep an eye on, gentlemen. And for true basketball fans out there, people that love the sport as much as we do, this week feels like heaven. Even with the stress of in and out, I mean, you got to just step back and enjoy how much chaos is going to ensue later this week during the conference tournaments. Gentlemen, thank you. I always learn so much on this show. I can't say I feel any better about my team's spot. Maybe that'll shift by the next time we talk, but I appreciate all the work you both put into this. We appreciate everybody who watches. Join us again Thursday on the next episode of Fielding the 68. For Rocco Miller, for Andy Bottoms, for producer Dagan Hughes, my name is Greg Waddell, and we'll see you Thursday.